Olivier, welcome. Now, you've been a very busy man these past 20 months or so. This interview comes on the back of the recent ACI Europe's annual Congress and, of course, COP26. Can you briefly take us through your perspective of the current state of the industry?
Thank you, Peter. I think we've all been very busy, indeed. I think where Europe's airports stand at the moment is that we've restarted, but we've not recovered yet. We got an easing of travel restrictions coordinated at EU level just before the summer, which was essential. We got the EU digital COVID certificates, which really was a key enabler in that restart.
Yes.
It gave confidence to people they could fly again and exercise their free movement. And that means that compared to the second quarter, where we were at minus 82% drop in passenger volumes compared to pre-pandemic levels, by August, we had recovered up to minus 47%. Then it plateaued a bit in September, October. We're getting a further boost in November with the opening of the US, of course. So at the moment, my guess is that airports are probably at minus 40%, some a bit better. So as you can see, it's a restart, but we can't call this yet a recovery. And indeed, we don't see a full recovery to 2019 volumes before 2025. I think what worries us now in this very moment is that we're seeing a worsening of the epidemiological situation around many countries in Europe. WHO has just said that Europe is becoming a hotspot again.
Yes.
And that, of course, comes with questions about the duration of the immunity afforded by the vaccines and the validity of the digital COVID certificates moving forward, and also the lack of uniform decisions across Europe as to when booster shots should be given and to who should receive those booster shots. So I think at the moment it's a bit tricky. I see some risk, some downside risk moving forward in the next months. For the moment, apart from traffic and the epidemiological situation, of course, we continue to face a very difficult economic and financial situation. I think we have systemic weakness across the airport industry in economic and financial terms. Airports have kept operating with no or little revenues for months. We got limited public aid compared to airlines, and we had to have recourse to massive debt. The debt level has increased by 200% compared to pre-pandemic. And that is still what keeps many airports running, because the current level of revenues are not enough to meet all the costs. So clearly, beyond that, what we see in terms of the medium and longer term impact of this continued and systemic financial weakness in the industry is concerns about our ability to invest in the future to develop airport infrastructure. We estimate that we don't see revenue generation putting us in a condition to invest before 2032.
So clearly we're facing a long way away. That's a long way away.
We're facing, and that's because of we'll need to service and reimburse the debt.
Yes.
And we know that we're moving into a situation where revenue generation will be constrained by lower volumes, but also by a lot of competitive pressures. But at the same time, our investment needs remain. I mean, it's true that you can put on hold for a few years your investment in future capacity, but ultimately you need to go back there. And very importantly, I mean, now decarbonization and sustainability is at the forefront, and the investment needs there are significant. I mean, if we looked at the cost for Europe's airports to decarbonize just their terminal buildings, and that cost is estimated at 26 billion euro. So, decarbonization costs money. And then you have digitalization, which is also linked to decarbonization, but wider, where there's a lot of needs for investment across the industry. So that's, in a nutshell, where we are.
It's like a catalogue of woes, isn't it? It's a layer upon layer of issues and problems. So for you now, given the current position, it's really all about a reset agenda. I mean, there's always a balancing act with airports. As you know, we'll get to sustainability, we'll get to digitalization later on. I mean, where do you see the key pain points right now that you can improve upon, and what are the main objectives that you think airports needs to action right now?
I think what I would say is that the main immediate pain point is secure our capability to restore revenue levels, and that is dependent on things we don't control, i.e., the epidemiological situations, the acceptance of governments that people can travel, the fact that we need to learn to live with COVID moving forward.
Yes.
So there's a lot of things that escape our control. Of course, at ACI, this is something we're discussing daily with governments, with European institutions. I was this morning in a call with the Director General for Health of the European Commission discussing those very issues. But I think beyond that, I think what we need we need governments to try not to go back to where we were a few months ago. Very harsh travel restrictions with quarantines. I think we have now vaccines that are effective. As long as we stay with the Delta variant and that we don't get new variants, I think we can be pretty safe in allowing people to travel, vaccinated people to travel without the need for quarantines and hopefully need for tests. I think when it comes to revenue generation beyond the epidemiological situation, I think it's about the support of regulators for us to help us restoring our revenue generation capabilities, and more generally financial support also for decarbonization. I think if we take EU airports, we were very disappointed that airports in general have been left out of the 750 billion recovery fund that was instituted by the EU. And now the money is flowing across member states, but very little of that money, if any, is going to airports. And that was really a missed opportunity, because the recovery fund was conceived to help those sectors that were the hardest hit and those sectors that have the most difficulties to decarbonize. And I can't think of any other sector than aviation that combines those two things more perfectly. Yet we were left out. There's still a lot of work moving forward. We have new rules on taxonomy being devised at the EU level. We have new rules on state aid. So we're very focused on making sure that at least those rules now allow us to get enhanced opportunity, could get public support for decarbonization. Because I think, not just for airports, but the challenge of decarbonization for aviation is such that beyond all the willingness of the industry and the fact that airports, airlines, ANSPs, aircraft and engine manufacturers have all come together and have laid out their roadmap, their joint roadmap to achieve net zero CO2 emission by 2050, it's not something we can do on our own, especially as we are trying to exit this massive crisis that hit us. So there must be the right economic incentives, the right regulatory incentives put in place, and the right public financing as well across the ecosystem.
Can I just drill this down? We referred earlier to a decarbonization imperative. Your membership includes over 500 airports spanning some 50 countries. And as you rightly say, none of them operate at the same speed or have the same financial resources. And we know what a deep well everybody's in at the moment. But how much do you think that societal pressure will serve to advance the industry's existing timeline of 2050? And what's the existing status amongst your airport memberships? Some are fast tracking, some are slow. What's the medium?
Well, I think first you raise a very important point with this societal pressure. And I think in the post-COVID era, this is a new era in terms of that societal pressure. I mean, clearly climate change and decarbonization have moved from being a scientific imperative that nobody has doubt about now, finally, to becoming a societal imperative, to then becoming a policy and regulatory imperative, especially in the EU and the UK. And I think in terms of policy making, we've reached a tipping point. I mean, we have in the EU the climate law, which mandates the objective for the whole economy to reach net zero by 2050. Since this summer, we have a full range of legislation being proposed by the European Commission to transform every single sector of our economy to move towards that goal. And I think COP26 also underlines, in my view, this tipping point in political and regulatory terms. I mean, you may say that, of course, COP26 didn't live up to the expectations in terms of, decisive and very strong, very decisive and strong global framework to decarbonize our economies. But still, there's been progress, and you can see that the wheels are starting to move, and they're not going to stop. And I think the most one very important factor that maybe is a bit overlooked is the fact that financial markets and investors are moving into that direction very fast. They are reassessing risk based on climate risk. There's a major reallocation of capital going on at the moment. And climate change is becoming a driver for investment decisions across the board.
Do you think that in these same decisions will basically be factored against the fact that basically airports are going to have to offer a lot more to their traveling passengers and accept there's going to be less revenue around?
Well, I think it's too early to tell. I think what you see is that all these climatization drivers are now converging, and that means that societal pressure is there and will not go away, and if anything, it will increase. I think actually the fact that too many COP didn't live up to the expectation, governments didn't live up to expectations at COP, means that the expectations from society on business will only increase. I think we've seen over the past years, people tend to trust businesses much more than governments. And I think this is something that every business needs to be very mindful of. And clearly, where I want to come down is that today, climatization, decarbonization is the absolute business imperative. All the more for the airports. And we are doing a lot. I think, we have a very good track record. We have a good story to tell because Europe's airports have been leaders globally on decarbonization. They've started working on carbon management more than a decade ago. And today we have more than 180 airports that are certified under airport carbon accreditation. Many of them are carbon neutral. The bulk of Europe's airports have committed not just through ACI Europe, but individually to net zero by 2050. We have close to 100 airports that are actually advanced that target now to 2030. And very importantly, we have now a number of airports that have actually achieved net zero carbon emissions for those emissions they control. I'm talking here about Swedavia and the 10 airports they operate in Sweden. So we are, it's not just about committing, but it's about working on it. And this is what airports are doing. And it's about delivering. And we're starting to deliver. I think the challenge for us is that actually when you look at those emissions that happen in aviation and on the airport side, those emissions that are actually directly controlled by the airport operator are quite small. It's about 5%. The bulk come, of course, from aircraft. And we don't control those aircraft. Yet, we do have an essential role to play to support and help airlines decarbonizing and aircraft to decarbonize. And I think that's something now you are seeing a lot of airports focusing on, how through increased efficiencies in operations on the ground, can I help airlines to decarbonize? How can I prepare for the deployment of sustainable aviation fuels, which will be a major part in that story of decarbonizing aircraft? How do I get prepared for the new energy systems that will power aircraft in the future, electric and hydrogen? And there's a lot happening on this at the moment. So I think our membership is very diverse and it covers a lot of countries, but we are seeing a movement, very clearly in that direction.
I think that's, if I may, you say that, there's no question that decarbonisation is inextricably linked to sustainability. And you do, as you mentioned with the hydrogen example, there are some very clear examples right now of moves in the right direction. I mean, you know, COP26 was in Glasgow, and I know that there's stuff happening in Scotland that's actually relevant in this case.
Yes, indeed. I think Glasgow is a very good example because they are now targeting to become net zero for their own emissions by 2035 as Glasgow Airport. But they really have a very comprehensive approach to sustainability. I mean, what they're looking at and what they're doing is really putting sustainability at the core of all their business decisions. And in that process, they are repurposing the airport and its mission. I think one of the latest projects they are involved in is a project with the NHS, the National Health Service, where they are actually looking at deploying drones to allow for the supply of medical equipment to remote communities in the vicinity in the region. So that really speaks volume about, you know, the crucial societal roles that our airports are playing and the very different facets of air connectivity. I think what we still have a major challenge, despite all the work that is going on, is underlying perception in the public and with some policymakers and regulators with the reality of our industry and how it is committing and delivering on sustainability. And I think this will continue to work on this. But you know, I think it comes down to the fact that in the end, we need people to understand that flying is not the problem. It's carbon that is the problem. It's carbon we need to go at.
Aren't Logan Air doing things as well that are of interest?
Yes, Logan Air is in the process of deploying electric-powered aircraft as well to serve some smaller islands. You have similar examples of initiatives taken in Scandinavia, but also in France near Brest. So it is moving. And I think it's interesting because, you know, we tend also to focus very much on the big airports and the large hubs, who, of course, are leaders in decarbonization and sustainability because they have the resources to do that, the experience and the know-how. But I think when you look in particular at decarbonization and the deployment of new energy systems for aircraft like electrification and hydrogen, especially electrification, actually the test beds are going to be at smaller regional airports because those new technologies will be available first for very small aircraft.
Okay, moving on. You talked earlier about a change, a reset of the business model. Now, the existing model of airport charges and fees has actually been entrenched for so long and seems so deeply rooted that change appears almost impossible. Do you see it differently now?
Well, I think COVID-19 has shown that airports are not risk-free business. You know, this is how some airlines in particular like to portray the airport in the past. But, you know, we've been hit very hard and, you know, it showed that it's not a risk-free business. But I think as we move forward and with all the societal pressure, the policy and regulatory pressure, the change in behavior from consumers, I think we are facing a future where the growth in demand, at least in Europe, for aviation will be lower than what we've been used to historically. And that for us is a problem because as airport, we are dependent on driven by passenger volumes. You know, we don't yield. You know, our charges are set sometimes years in advance. They are fixed. You can't change them unless you go to your regulator and get involved in very complicated consultations with airlines and, you know, hope for a decision ultimately. All this takes time. So we don't actually have the freedom to price based on the market. And that means that the only way for an airport to increase its revenues is by increasing volumes. But when you're faced with a future where you don't have anymore the assurance of dynamic passenger traffic growth, of course, that questions the entire business model. But in all that, I think all the same, charges remain essential because airport charges are about users paying for the infrastructure they use. And the user pays is a cornerstone of green policies. And of course, enforcing that principles and potentially giving more freedom to airports and more flexibility for airports to charge and in setting their charging policies, that clearly puts us on collision course with the airlines and to some extent with some regulators, because for some regulators still, the interest of the airlines tends to equate the interest of the consumers, which is not the case. So I think we need the regulatory system around airport charges to evolve, to reflect first and foremost the market dynamics, because we've seen airport competition developing already before this crisis over the past 20 years, on the back of the fantastic growth of the low-cost carriers, the fact that they went into primary airports. But with this crisis, where we're also faced with significant supply pressures in the recovery on the airline side, potentially also airline consolidation coming up. I mean, we're seeing Iberia snapping Air Europa. Wizz Air tried to snap EasyJet. I mean, there's going to be consolidation on the airline side. So I think the balance, or rather the imbalance in the airport-airline relationship, is going to continue to evolve. And clearly it's going to continue to evolve to the benefit of the airlines. So I think in that context, keeping in place a very tight regulatory framework, which systematically assume that airports have a dominant position and that they are able to exert this dominant position, is no longer reflective of reality. So I think in the coming years, there's going to be a lot happening in that space, and for us it's going to be a big part of our job to try to drive the evolution of the regulatory framework.
I think a lot of this is to do with getting the right share of voice out there as well, getting more people to fully understand exactly what the situation is on airport and the modelling. Yeah. But of course, part of airports' income generation, in terms of there's a great dependency on non-aeronautical revenues. Airports and airlines alike. I mean, omni-channel is certainly one way forward, but the real bugbear for airports remains the existing MAG model, certainly in terms of their retail partners. There's been some divergence. We know there are some examples where there are some joint ventures between airports and their retail partners, but these are the exceptions to the rule. I mean, arguably it's rather like everything else within the airport community. There's this entrenched conservatism, there's a patent lack of vision, there's risk-averse management, shareholder pressure, and the list goes on. It's essentially financial and cultural. I mean, do you actually see any evidence of a change in mindset amongst the airport community? And isn't it now really a case of building back smarter, not just better?
Yes, I think it's true. There's a lot of instability at the moment, and that can lead people to be indeed risk averse or trying to defend their share of the pie. I think it's a natural reaction, given the shock we've been through. But I think given the pressures we're facing as airports on the aeronautical side of our business, the MAG is going to have to remain an essential pillar for us in our economic model and financing model. There's not going to be many ways around that. I think the key issue is going to be, how, not so much how to share the pie, but how we can grow the pie together in a very challenging context. And that means that, yes, change will be needed. I think it's important also to stress that there's no one size fits all. Clearly, and that's going to be even more the case in the future. But if we want to grow the pie further, rather than fight about the existing pie, I think cooperation and digitalization are going to be the two keywords and the two key avenues to look for very, very clearly. And this is something we need to work very closely with our commercial partners, but potentially also, hopefully, one day with the airlines, because there's a lot of potential there. But that's been the holy grail for many years. I'm curious to see if this crisis will finally allow us to make some inroads in that direction. ?
Well, I mean, they're operating in silos at the moment. All the elements of the community, they're mutually exclusive. Where It's where needs must. If you have to collaborate because the business demands it, it's done. But all the other areas seem to be pushed to one side, and it's just really sad to see that. I've been in 25 years plus in the business, and there is no real collaboration as exists in other business communities. It's quite extraordinary. It's attitude, it's historical, it's cultural. I don't know whatever is going to break through.
Well, I think to some ways, we are facing, moving forward, an almost existential challenge, like just any business, because of decarbonization, and that challenge is leading to a reset of business models. It leads corporates to look at things differently and things differently. So I'm hopeful that this will trigger cooperation. I mean, you might say this is not what we're seeing with the airlines at the moment. I'm sure you'll come back to that later. But I think when it comes to our relation with our commercial partners, at the same time, we've seen a lot of airports, helping out commercial partners during the crisis, and we know we have to make it work together.
Collaboration is key. It's about knocking heads together, frankly, it seems to be. Anyway, you said this earlier, and it's still true, airports make very easy targets. You also said that flying's not the enemy, but carbon is. Now, just moving on a little bit, urban airports seem to be the coming thing, and they seem to tick a lot of boxes in terms of potential future travel use. Do you actually see them as complementary? Or do they pose threats to some airports, notably regional airports, potentially?
Well, I think we need to look at this as complementary and look how we can cooperate and leverage the innovation and the new services that are coming out. So I think you have a lot of airports who are now looking beyond their own fence in terms of charting the way towards the evolution of their business model.
Munich's a good example. They've just signed up.
Exactly. And it's driven by of course the need to diversify revenue generation. But I think it's also driven by, coming back to what I mentioned earlier, repurposing the airport. It's reassessing its societal role, trying to expand that societal role further. To gain the recognition and earn the societal relevance, the license to operate and to grow. So I think that's also an important factor in looking at complementarity.
Health and safety remain the primary objectives of all airports. Given the ramifications of COVID, how do you actually now view wellness as a category that should be added to this? It becomes a triumvirate, as it were.
Well, I think we're seeing that through already, through the offerings at many airports. I think again we're primarily placed. I think we have the skill set, we have the environment, we have the opportunity, and I think this will keep growing. Of course, it's a promising side of the business, along with, I think, generally speaking, sustainability offerings. Not just in relation to wellness, but the type of product you offer. So I think it will push further the localization, the sense of place, but with a sustainability touch.
Now, just moving on to another theme that's been recurring during the course of this interview, and of course features strongly in some of your own speeches. You prioritized digitalization, both from an operational point of view as well as a commercial point of view for the industry. Now, because of COVID, obviously, investment has taken a back seat. Which particular areas would you say airports now need to prioritize?
Yes, investment has taken a back seat, but we have seen actually COVID-19 as an accelerator of digitalization when it comes to biometrics and contactless. So I think this is clearly something airports have been prioritizing in terms of, getting adapted to the new operational reality that is coming out with COVID-19, where passengers become very health conscious, where they need to be reassured, where we need to do our utmost to guarantee, the very best health safety experience. So, health safety is a priority there. But I think, and again, I'm coming back to decarbonization and sustainability. I think you're going to see digitalization as a fantastic enabler of achieving greater efficiencies that allow in turn to reduce energy consumption, both for the airport and for the operational partners, with the airlines on at the very top of that. So that's why airports are very involved in CSAR, in the Single European Sky. And I think this is one of the areas where we can see a bright future. I think this speaks about the change of culture. Of course,
Yes.
again, it's about breaking the operational silos between all the partners. The difficulty for the airport is sometimes to have the authority to take a leadership role there. Because you need to bring the airlines, the ground handlers, the customs and authorities, the police, the surface transport providers, all together, and try to push for a common agenda through digitalization of increased efficiency. But I think coming back to culture, so it's the culture across the board between operational partners. But I see a lot of airports now establishing innovation labs. So really wanted to play a driving and very active role in digitalization, where the airport is not just the buyer of ready-made solutions, but where the airport wants to act as a co-creator to get more tailor-made solutions, and ultimately also try to sell those solutions across the board. So behind that, you also have new revenue opportunities. But of course, doing all that at the moment is very challenging because of the financial situation.
Can I come back to something you alluded to a short while ago, where we talk about other industry bodies, which you are purportedly meant to be working alongside within the business. As we said, sometimes there's a degree of mutual exclusivity that simply shouldn't be there. People operate in their silos. And it seems to have reared its ugly head again with your recent exchange with IATA. Now, as an industry observer, I find it baffling that IATA can be so out of touch with the realities of the hammering that airports have taken, with a largely token support, as you mentioned, from governments these past 20 months or so. And, they're complaining again about airport charges and seemingly want airports to continue to, for want of a better phrase, take the hit. This, of course, is in sharp contrast to the government support that airlines themselves have enjoyed over the same period. I mean, are there any fresh developments here regarding a softening of positioning on their parts, or at least, at the very least, a better understanding? Are you getting anywhere?
Well, I wish there was, but unfortunately, there's no real development and no news that I can give you about this. I think for us, certainly, it's been disappointing to see IATA taking that stance. I think what it tells about is that IATA's ideal aviation world seems to be stuck in the 1960s.
They're in a cocoon.
Airports are used as instrument of direct subsidization to airlines, and behind that, it's nothing new in terms of our relationship with IATA, but it's down to airlines not refusal to see airports being businesses in their own right, which has been the evolution of the airport model in Europe over those past 20, 30 years. And I think that model has served the airlines very well in terms of the efficiency and the quality of the infrastructure and the price quality equation, certainly. It has served very well passengers. It has allowed for airport development without having government and taxpayers paying for it. So I think it has served society very well beyond the mere interest of the airlines. Clearly, we cannot be forced into further financial distress to the benefit of the airlines. And that's a message we are putting out loud and clear. We remain very open and willing to cooperate with IATA, and on some other aspects, we are cooperating with IATA. But it's true that we have worked much more closely in this crisis with a number of regional airline associations like F4E and ERA in particular. I think down the line, I think this is disappointing because we all face the challenge of business reset. I mean, the whole air transport ecosystem because of the decarbonization challenge. I mean, we have to go through the biggest transformation ever this aviation has gone through. And I'm using here the word ecosystem and not the word value chain, because the word value chain is a favorite of IATA, and behind value chain, it's all about the design for cross-subsidization from airports to airlines. But yeah, I think this business reset is something we must all confront. We must find new equilibriums. We must redefine the ecosystem. And I think we stand a better chance to do that together than fighting one against the other. And especially at a time where we have to convince governments and society of our continued relevance, for society and the importance of air connectivity. So, I hope at some point we can look at these things differently, and that we can work more closely together.
Arguably, you still need to beat that drum very, very hard indeed in terms of getting the messaging out there, because in some ways it could be said that the airlines seem to have a greater share of voice.
And well, they always have. It's nothing new.
These things can be changed. I mean, fair dues. They can be changed.
We're never shy of putting our voice out, and I think it is what our airport members want us to do and expect from us.
For sure. Olivier, we've covered a lot of ground. There's really just one final question. If there were 3 things you wanted to say and address to the business community watching this film, what would they be?
I think it's the fact that now it's time to rush our business transformation forward. Airports have been B2B, they've transformed into B2C, and now the next stage is there. It's B2P, business to people, and repurposing, the airport to address the challenge of societal relevance. I think that's the key direction I see for our industry. Then the second message would be about our leadership as a community, as the airport community, acting together. And through that leadership, making sure the airport can be the catalyst for change, because airports are entrenched into the specific territory; they're very close to their communities. So I think we are quite uniquely placed to lead when it comes to the challenge of societal relevance and acceptance. And then the third message would be to thank our airport members for all their support during the crisis. We've done our utmost to be close to them, to support them into that crisis, and we got a lot of positive feedback. And basically, I just want to reassure our airport members that we're going to continue to stand by their side, because we are for and with airports always. So we have a great team in Brussels here working for the European airport industry, and we released the challenge of continuing to do so, and of accompanying our airports in the business transformation and in addressing the challenge we face.
Olivier Jankovec, thank you for your time. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Peter. My pleasure.